Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, PNNL. My name is Elizabeth Stevens. I am with the Office of STEM Education, and I'm excited to introduce you to our researchers, Kayleen Gunn, Allison Myers-Pig, and Peter Regier, who will be presenting the Flooded Classroom, a virtual exploration of a coastal ecosystem. But first, a quick reminder to post your questions via Twitter, hashtag Energy Earth Day, hashtag PNNL, and we will address your questions at the end. With that said, please welcome our first researcher, Kayleen.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you all for being here today, and happy Earth Day. My name is Kayleen Gunn, and I'm an earth scientist with PNNL's Coastal Sciences Division. I received my Bachelor's of Science in Geology, and my research background is in coastal ecology. I have studied many aspects of coastal and marine environments, including researching environmental impacts of marine energy and studying soils and plants in wetland ecosystems. In recent years, my work has been dedicated to STEM outreach and science communication. I'm a lover of the outdoors and art, and I bring those passions into my work as much as possible. I love sharing science with the world and look forward to diving in with you today. And with that, I'll pass it on to Allison.
Thanks, Kayleen. Hi, everyone. Happy Earth Day. My name is Allison Myers-Pig. I'm a staff scientist at PNNL in the Biological Sciences Division, and I'm located in sunny Sequim, Washington, at the Marine and Coastal Research Laboratory. While my degrees are in oceanography, I like to take a holistic approach to studying the environment. And I'm really interested in understanding how different ecosystems are connected, like the land, coastal environments, and the ocean, and how that connection is changing with the changing climate. I really enjoy STEM education and outreach, and I like being able to share my science with folks from all different backgrounds. I also love to explore the natural world around me and enjoy outdoor activities like gardening, hiking, and kayaking. Now I'm going to pass to Peter to introduce himself before we go ahead and get started.
Well, hey everyone, my name is Peter Regier. Happy Earth Day. I'm a postdoc working at PNNL's Coastal Science Division, which is also in sunny Sequim. I received my PhD in environmental chemistry, and my research is in biogeochemistry and aquatic environments. In my research, I use water quality sensors and data analysis like machine learning to help us understand how coastal and freshwater systems like rivers and estuaries are responding to natural and human-derived changes. I'm pretty new to the field of STEM education, but I've had an absolute blast working with Kayleen and Allison and the rest of the team on this project. And when I'm not working, you can usually find me outside somewhere. I'm trying to hike or camp or fish or dive somewhere. And now back to Allison for a brief introduction to the project.
Thanks so much, Peter. So today we are going to take a virtual trip to Beaver Creek, which is a coastal watershed ecosystem that's located in the Puget Sound region of Washington State. So here on these slides, you can see two pictures of the same ecosystem at low and at high tide. This watershed consists of a river that's impacted by tides and a forest that drains into the river connected via a floodplain. So basically, the ecosystem has allowed our team of scientists to study how ecosystems respond to changes in the environment, as this particular ecosystem was restored for fish passage in 2014, and it is now transitioning from an ecosystem that was a freshwater ecosystem to a saltwater influenced one. These studies then can contribute to the pools of knowledge that inform predictive models that help us to understand how our climate is changing. This ecosystem has been studied as a part of a series of small internal PNNL projects that showed us how we can study these types of dynamic ecosystems and has provided a foundational data set and knowledge to further utilize on other ecosystems that are impacted by natural sea level rise and extreme weather events.
So our research approach at Beaver Creek has proved to be a really successful way for us to integrate field data and modeling to help us understand complex ecosystems. This work has helped us establish a much larger new multi-institutional project called Compass that includes 5 national labs, multiple universities, and the Smithsonian Institute. Compass is looking at the impact of sea level rise and weather events on land-water interfaces across the Great Lakes and Chesapeake Bay. We recently installed monitoring sites in these regions that are designed based on many of the different lessons that we've learned during our research at Beaver Creek.
The topics and outcomes from this project fostered an interest in sharing our field science with the world. This sparked the idea to create a virtual learning resource that brings people like you into the research with us. Beaver Creek isn't a type of environment many people interact with on a regular basis, and we want people to experience these dynamic and important wetland ecosystems like we do. Sharing science and providing behind the scenes perspectives on the people and places behind our research makes it more meaningful to us. We were excited to have the opportunity to develop an interactive learning module targeted at high school students to teach about ecosystem science in an interactive way that encourages inquiry and cultivates curiosity. With that, we developed the Flooded Classroom, a virtual experience to learn about PNNL field research in a changing coastal ecosystem. This is a Prezi-based learning resource that we will explore with you today. And I am going to take over the screen. Okay, let's see. And hopefully you can all see the Prezi. There we go. So here is the Flooded Classroom. To get started, we welcome learners to join us on a field trip into our study site, Beaver Creek. This Getting Started section invites you to dive in and go on a research journey with us as a part of our field crew. This video here walks you through how 360-degree videos work, which are used throughout the module, and sets expectations for what kinds of information will be provided and how learners will be asked to participate throughout, including making observations and asking questions, which they will do in their field notebooks. The 360 videos on a computer can be perused with a mouse, which I will show you in a little bit. And on a mobile device, you can actually turn around and look up and down with your device as if viewing another world around you through the window of that device, which is really cool. As learners watch the videos, we ask them to think like a scientist and build on their learning as the module progresses, making connections and thinking critically about the ecosystem as they learn more. Our team also developed a guide to support teachers and provide links to get the most out of this resource. This teacher's guide is available on the STEM Education Resources page on the PNNL website, which we will share at the end of the presentation. Now we're going to start the journey. So I'll click through this. The next video acts as the introduction, which I will play to show how these 360-degree videos work. It seems like you may not be able to hear the audio. Is that correct? Yeah. Well, I'll just show you around, show you how these 360-degree videos work. There is a voiceover that is leading you through how to observe the ecosystem, asking questions, and giving you some ways to interact with it, and invites learners to write things down, make observations in their notebooks. So that's the purpose of this video. And each of the sections throughout has a video like this that really builds on the learning from the last. So with that, you will begin your research with Peter.
Thanks, Kayleen. So now we're going to get to know the project a little bit more. This section goes into more detail about how our research is set up, about the team of scientists who do this work, and the wide range of roles needed to make a successful research project. Roles like the principal investigators, the subject matter experts, the scientists, and the technicians. and also the tools needed to conduct fieldwork and data analysis back in the lab. As you can see, it's all sorts of different things that go into a successful field trip, and the main research questions we hope to answer throughout the module. Including the big question. So at our project site, a barrier was built across Beaver Creek, which kept tides out and converted the watershed to a freshwater ecosystem. Back in 2014, the barrier was removed and this restored tidal flow into Beaver Creek. Since tides were recently reintroduced into this system, this field site is really useful for helping us understand how small coastal ecosystems like Beaver Creek are responding to the effects of sea level rise. Our research looks at the different aspects of how Beaver Creek and the land connected to it by tidal flooding is responding to this dramatic environmental change. As scientists, we dig into smaller questions about ecosystems to help us gain insight into larger scale questions. Now we're going to walk you through what each of these sections is about.
Yeah, so first we're going to start with the trees, and we're going to take a look at the trees in this coastal ecosystem. Trees are actually a really great indicator species of how an environment may be changing. They are visually responsive to how they are doing. So, for example, if you have any house plants, you know if your plants are happy or not by how their leaves look. I know if my plants are unhappy if their leaves are droopy, for example. These same types of principles apply to trees. So here in this part of the flooded classroom, we encourage the audience to make observations about the trees in the 360-degree video that's shown in the upper right-hand side. They then learn important terms and ask questions about what contributes to tree health and aspects of the ecosystem that might be causing trees in this ecosystem to be dying. So, for example, here we talk about tree physiology and how seawater affects tree health. We offer several resources to learn more about the effects of saltwater on trees and encourage learners to think about how these dynamics may be impacting the ecosystem of study. So each module also has a glossary of terms and opportunities to learn more about these topics. There are also additional resources and fun facts that can be found wherever you see a star as well. So for example, this is an explanation of what sap flow is in a tree.
All right, next we'll look at where the water is coming from. So here we're talking about water dynamics to have the learners think more critically about flooding. So tides are obviously a huge influence in this ecosystem. So we provide some resources that help show how tides work and what these tides look like in Beaver Creek. So if you look in the lower left-hand corner, this is actual data that we've collected at Beaver Creek showing tidal cycles across a couple of months. So this is also a great opportunity for teachers to connect to lessons about tides using a real-world example. For teachers in the group, the teacher's guide walks through some of these options and helps make this a more realistic virtual science experiment. We also talk about key concepts relating to tides like salinity and cycles and oscillations, which all affect the system. As participants build on their learning, we encourage them to pause and make connections. So for example, they just learned about trees and made some observations. Now they're making observations about tides and they can relate trees to tides.
So building upon this, we're now going to zoom into location, which is an underlying cause for many of the changes that we see happening across the landscape in these videos, such as the rising tide and tree health declining. This field site in particular has really distinctive changes in elevation and landscape features that affect the water dynamics and the vegetation that exists here. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see a bird's eye view of the elevation of the landscape, and you can hypothesize on what areas may flood or may not flood. We then ask learners to think back to both the trees and the water observations and think about what role the elevation is playing in the changing ecosystem. We encourage them to think about how the trees may be influenced about where they live. So if they're close to the river, if they're in an upland environment, in an area that consistently floods, for example, how that may impact how they're doing. Again, we provide resources to help visualize things like how the elevation connects this environment. So on the right hand side is a GIF actually showing a model simulation of how the ecosystem floods during a flooding period. And that's really driven by these differences in elevation that exist in the floodplain. So again, throughout the modules, we ask learners to make connections and answer smaller questions that can help address large scale research.
So now we bring it all together and talk about what we learned. So based on our observation and analysis of the trees, water dynamics, and elevation at this site, we learned a lot about what tools and approaches help us understand complex coastal ecosystems like Beaver Creek. We learned that the creek is connected to a full floodplain, that salinity in the system is increasing, and the trees exposed to seawater are dying. And we can make data-driven predictions about the future of this system based on what we learned. This then helps scientists understand what might happen to other coastal freshwater ecosystems that are impacted by sea level rise. Connecting these various pieces provides important information that informs models and helps predict how ecosystems respond to environmental stressors and changes. Lastly, projects like this help identify new questions that we want to ask and future studies to pursue that will help us ask even bigger questions. As you can tell, science is all about asking questions, and we really encourage learners to dive into that. We've included relevant discussion questions and many resources to dive deeper into these topics into the teacher's guide, and I want to show you what that looks like. So I won't go through the whole thing, but here is our teacher's guide. It includes things like an introduction. It relates to certain standards, so teachers can really hone in on what standards to connect to. It goes through how to work the Prezi. There are lots of great details, and we really encourage teachers to use this as a resource. So now I will pass it back to Liz to start the question and answer portion.
Hi there, everyone. So we do have a few questions for you. So to start us off, I'm going to ask Allison, what is the most interesting project or research you have done at PNNL?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. That's a really great question. And I think it's really hard to pick because I work on a variety of different things at PNNL that are all equally exciting in their own way. So the project that we just talked about, for example, the Beaver Creek ecosystem, is actually my first project that I worked on as in being at PNNL. And so that was really fun. We did a ton of field work. We were in the field so much, and that was so much fun. I really like to have a variety of experiences, and so, for example, the new project that Peter was just talking about, which is a multi-institutional project that's led by PNNL. It's called Compass. We actually literally just got back from the field last week for that. So I got to, trade my computer for some waders and romp around in wetlands for an entire week. So that was great. So I really think that I can't pick a favorite because I love all the projects that I work on, and they're all super fun. Actually, this flooded classroom project was such a joy. It was so great to work with those who really have that background and mindset of STEM education and meld that with our really research driven work. So a lot of the things that you saw throughout the presentation today actually was like real data that we turned into cartoons or GIFs. And so I think that has also been a really fun thing that we've been doing.
Kayleen, would you also like to share some insight?
Sure. I've worked on so many interesting projects. I also got to be part of the Beaver Creek Fields work, but a different wetland system that I got to do research in was on the Columbia River in Washington, on the Washington-Oregon border. And I did this research project where we were looking at how wetlands naturally pull carbon out of the atmosphere and act as climate change solutions naturally. And we got to go to all these cool sites and figure out how much carbon was being stored in the soils. And I got to explore swamps and these wild ecosystems that I don't think a lot of people get to explore. And it was just so cool to see the earth in that lens. Like, these are actual solutions and they naturally exist and we need to protect them, but the earth has this ability to really be a huge part in sort of the fight for climate change. And sometimes you have to let it just do its thing and let these ecosystems naturally thrive. So I really loved that project, and it's very similar to some of the work with Beaver Creek.
Excellent, Peter. I am looking at you next. Would you like to add and share with us some of your insight? And not only that, I'm going to add to it. Can you also include why you chose your career and
Yeah,
the path?
yeah, absolutely. Allison and Kayleen have awesome answers. They covered a ton, and I work closely with them, so I think they stand alone. um, but yeah, no, we have the opportunity to do just a whole bunch of really interesting projects in interesting places. And one of my favorite parts about PNNL is that we get to do bigger picture science. So instead of little projects that answer little questions, we can do a whole bunch of projects that all point towards bigger questions, which I think is really cool. Um, and why, yeah, how I ended up here. I was very motivated to do something related to climate change, and that led me into academia. And I spent some time in academia, and then I was looking around for, well, what is the next big thing? Who is making substantial contributions to research? Who's doing research at the scale of answering, how does the US, address this? And that kept leading me back to DOE. So that's why I'm at DOE, which I think is just amazing. I think it's really cool that we get to spend time doing cool research with cool people, and at the end of the day, we answer big questions.
It is exciting to hear. The one thing that's resonating is just that wanting to create change and having that larger impact. And so that is so exciting to hear because people can, see and you show your passion for what you do. So I'm going to piggyback a little bit more. So you shared some of your exciting projects, including, of course, the Beaver Creek and everything that was done to this. But is there anything else within your field that you enjoy the most in particular, and why? And feel free if anyone wants to pop up first.
I could, not to take over. So we do a little bit of work also on like applied questions. So instead of thinking about how does the coastal marsh, how does it work for it to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, how can we optimize technologies to do that better? And I think that's really cool. We get to take our science background and apply it to meaningful solutions, things that we can incorporate into industry or um, yeah. I think that's one of the really cool parts. Something I really enjoy on the day to day is being able to do fun science and then being able to turn it into tangible outcomes. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I could add to that a little bit. Echo everything that Peter just said. Um, and I'll say that one of the things that I really enjoy is just being able to actually work across traditional academic disciplines. So, for example, I'm a classically trained oceanographer, but I work actually on a day to day with people who are classically trained, mathematicians, for example, that are building these complex computational models to understand how the earth works. And so, really having these like transdisciplinary conversations where we're moving across the traditional discipline to get at these solutions that may be applied or maybe super fundamental, I think is really enriching, and everyone has their own unique flavor that they bring to the conversation. And so these large team science projects that we work on, you just get to learn so much about so many different things. And so every day I go into work, I learn something new, and I think that that's what I actually enjoy the most about my career here at PNNL, and also just the field that I've ended up in.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Kayleen, I'm going to jump to you. Can you describe to the audience how does your day look like, just day to day as a researcher, as a scientist? Can you describe that for us?
Kind of, because every single day I show up to work, my day looks a little bit different. And that is one of my favorite parts of my job, that I get to come to work knowing I'm trying to make a difference in some way, but I never get bored. So sometimes I'm writing proposals, I'm working with other scientists to come up with ideas, new things we want to try, or experiments to set up. Sometimes on the communication side of things, I'm interviewing researchers and writing stories about the work they do and why their research matters. Sometimes I'm teaching scientists how to communicate their work. Like I said, I love art, and that PNNL has allowed me to explore how to incorporate art into my career. So I work with scientists and I help them build materials, really creative materials around how to communicate their work and bring certain displays and materials to outreach events. Sometimes I'm in the field, which is my favorite thing in the world to do, but you don't get to do that all the time. Sometimes I'm looking at data. Sometimes I'm talking to researchers about challenges they're having, and we work through problems together and ask big questions. So every day looks different. It's something that brings me a lot of joy. And I think that the others may agree that being a scientist is never boring. There's always something something new happening, and something that pops into your day that you may not have expected. And I personally love that about my job.
No, I love to hear that, especially hearing about how you can bring in, art and communications into STEM and being able to describe to others how it's integrated and how valuable that it is a part of it too. So for our last question, and I'm going to probably bump it to Kayleen, just kind of short and sweet. What can we, as learners or citizens, do locally to help reduce or fight climate change? As we're looking at today, Earth Day, is there something? I know it's probably a longer answer, but if you can, what can you share with us just briefly on?
Well, there are a lot of things you can do, but I'll really focus on what you personally can do in your own life. First of all, the more you learn, the better you can be a steward of the earth. So really learning information, watching documentaries, talking to scientists, using resources like the one we've talked about today that are made by scientists, that go into specific topics about climate change and talk about solutions. The more you can learn things like that, the more you start to care about the environment and actually have a positive outlook on how we can change things moving forward. So I think that's really important. Two, the little things do add up. So after a couple mistakes bringing the not bringing my bag to the grocery store, I made a habit of always bringing a bag to the grocery store. I buy used clothes, I buy food locally. All those types of things really sort of help collectively move toward a more sustainable future. So even if it may not seem like it's making a difference, the more we can all be doing in our daily lives to just move towards sustainability and think about how our actions affect the world around us, is a positive thing. So I will leave it at that. There are a lot of things you can do. I encourage you all to learn more. Just dive in, talk to scientists. Yeah, and Earth Day is a great day to celebrate some of the things we can all be doing.
That is excellent. Leave it on that high note of a sustainable future that we should all thrive for. So I just want to say, thank you for everyone for joining us, today. And please, again, go to our PNNL STEM Education resource website to download the Flooded Classroom and the Educator's Guide. You'll see the link, and if you have your camera ready, you can just, click on that QR code. It'll lead you directly there. And I would like to say, just have fun exploring. And thank you again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.